Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to this session with Ray Dalio. My name is Bob Kegan. Just a minute about how I happen to be here. I'm a professor of psychology at Harvard University. I've spent a lifetime studying adult development, the kinds of things that help people grow, and the things that keep people from growing. Over the last several years, I've been on a search for organizations that may take a radical approach to people development, that may be essentially messages from the future, and that's how I came to meet Bridgewater and Ray Dalio. So let me ask you to join me in welcoming the founder of Bridgewater, the most successful hedge fund in the world, Ray Dalio.
And thank you, Bob.
So we're going to talk for a while between the two of us, and then we'll throw things open to you, so be ready. But let's start by giving you a chance to kind of share what you think are some of the essential features of Bridgewater.
Okay.
It's weird, isn't it?
That echoes a little weird, but we'll get over it. In one sentence, what I wanted was to have meaningful work and meaningful relationships through radical truth and radical transparency. By meaningful work, in other words, to be on a mission, to do great things, and I wanted to do that with people that I really cared about. I wanted something more than just a job and work. And through radical truth, I mean being able to speak frankly about anything, including mistakes, weaknesses, problems. By bringing problems to the surface, weaknesses to the surface, we could deal with those forthrightly, and that honesty was important. And the radical transparency, meaning tape everything and let everybody see everything, gave everybody a true understanding so that they can make their own independent decisions, assessments of things. You can't have an idea meritocracy if you can't see things for yourself. So I found that worked in support of each other because I have more of an owner mentality. I find that people bringing up their mistakes and weaknesses is something that they can get over, and it's the basis of producing better results. And it's given fantastic relationships. It's painful in the moment sometimes. People are not used to focusing on those things, but we do it in an idea meritocratic way, so it's non-hierarchical, and it brings us close together, and it's the reason for our success. I think that being in the markets has given me a different approach to decision making than most people have, because, you know, if I make right or wrong decisions, I get the rewards and penalties of that. And I've developed a lot of humility. In order to be successful in the markets, you have to be an independent thinker because the consensus is built into the price. So you have to have a view that's different from other people's. And whenever you do, there's a high probability that you're wrong. So what we needed to do was have people who have independent thinking, and we're willing to thrash that out, and would also have the humility of dealing with that weakness.
Let's talk for just a second, because it's easy to say, but sounds like it could be a hard experience for people. I mean, how would you describe the ways people actually experience their, first months in the company, and why do you think they have the kinds of difficulties they do?
The thing about it is it's only psychologically hard.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start to take a different attitude about it, it's pleasurable, so they go from pain to pleasure. It's hard because neurologically we understand that there are sort of two of us in there. There's the upper levels cerebral person who would say, would you like to know, Bob, what I really think of you? Would you like to know about your mistakes and weaknesses? Of course, well, I want to know those things.
Sure, I want to get better and improve.
Right. But we also have an emotional reaction, the amygdala, the fight or flight part of our brain. So it takes a lot of adapting. It's the reconciliation of their lower emotional thems with their cerebral thems, because they all feel that they want to do it. They know enough about it before they come in that they say, yeah, I'd really like to do that, and I know it'll be difficult. And then we work them through the difficulties, and some make it and some don't.
So let's get into a little bit of the structures, the practices, the tools, so people can have a sense of what really goes on there. So transparency. You talked about this thing of taping every session. What's the power of that? What's the import of that?
Well, first of all, everybody knows that it's truthful, so there's no spin. Secondly, everybody sees others making their own mistakes, having their weaknesses. Thirdly, everybody has an understanding of really what's going on. Fourth, you get to bring up to the surface all these different points of view so that you can deal with it. Fifth, you have this ownership mentality. So it's okay. It's like family. It takes some getting used to, but it's...
Yeah. I read a study recently that showed the millennials most want more feedback. It sounds like Bridgewater would be millennial heaven. It's continuous feedback. Can you explain this thing called the dot collector? What goes on with that?
Okay. We've created an app, a device in which... let me step back before I do to explain our background in machine decision making. So something like 1984 or 5, we started to put rules into the computer, and we have decision-making systems which are essentially expert systems, computerized decision-making systems. And so I believe very much in an evidence-based system and the power of the computer to help in decision-making a lot, but you have to keep collecting the information. So we have this device, and it's on the iPad, and as a meeting is going on, people in a very simple way, easy way, can input their thinking about what's going on, including by person. So we have, as you've seen it, something like 60 different characteristics of people, and their attributes. There are things like whether the person's creative, whether they're, if they're low creativity, they can hit the name, they hit low creativity, and they hit a dot, and they provide a lot of feedback. And so what it does is it brings to the surface what everybody's thinking about everything. And then when we have disagreements, we bring those to the surface, and we have what I call believability-weighted decision-making. Over a period of time, in ways that would be maybe too long to explain, we have knowledge of different people's believabilities in different dimensions. Somebody's more creative, somebody's more reliable, somebody has a better expertise. Like a doctor, you would say, I'd rather have the opinion from the doctor than to have an opinion from anybody about something. And so all of that information is processed live so that you can see it and you can see the disagreements. And it's incredibly powerful because you cannot imagine what people are thinking. I promise you the people in this room right now are thinking all different things. And so by bringing it all to the surface, and particularly disagreements to the surface, it's very powerful because you start to think, might you be wrong? When there's disagreement, who might be right and who might be wrong? This is a technique that I learned, the markets taught me humility. Mm-hmm. So what I found that was helpful for me was to find the people who disagree, smartest people I know who disagree with me, and to try to see it through their eyes. And by doing that, I would reduce my chances of being wrong, and I would get a fabulous education. And so I think the greatest tragedy of mankind is that people keep in their heads wrong thoughts, wrong opinions. Opinions are a dime a dozen, and they're often misleading, and they're not tested. And so by being able to bring many different thoughts and opinions to the surface, people get to see that. In addition, then I have the computer do the processing of that information. So when we start to think about, well, you've answered one way and you've answered another, and we can then have the computer do correlations of what that's indicative of what people are like, that becomes essentially the computer making different assessments of people or providing them information, and it's not personal. So it helps people form a profile of what people are like. I think it's very important to know what people are like. Yet most organizations don't want to go there. By knowing what people are like and having them part of the process of knowing what they're like, there's better understanding, better communication, and also, of course, you can make better teams because nobody has all that's needed to be successful. We need each other to play different roles, and the ability to do that by knowing what people are like is enhanced.
You mentioned, what all these people are thinking. What do you think are the most common misunderstandings of Bridgewater?
Well, one that's common is that it's a cult.
A cult. It appears you've struck a nerve. Okay, so why isn't it a cult?
It's the opposite of a cult, right? It's independent thinking. It's you knowing that you have the right and obligation to make sense of everything and that you could follow that through. So it nurtures independent thinking. It is a culture, but I think it's very important to have every organization to have their culture, because I think that what alienates people or drives them together are values. So these meaningful relationships come out of having those kinds of similar values. So it's a culture, but it's the opposite of a cult.
People have said to me, because they know I'm studying your company, should I be worried about Bridgewater, hearing about all these conflicts that are coming out, at the leadership level? My answer was, when you hear there's no conflict at Bridgewater, then you should be worried.
Well, that's true.
So you have a very special relationship to conflict. I think we should talk about that a little, about its value.
Yeah, I think that, as I say, the biggest problem of mankind probably is tragedy of mankind, because it could be overcome, is people holding opinions in their mind that are wrong and not bringing them on the table and looking at them analytically. And I think the most powerful antidote of that is thoughtful disagreement, calm, that you start to have curiosity of what the other person thinks, and that you have to have a process of working yourself through disagreements. So disagreements are good. You have the independent thinking, and it's a very powerful learning tool to work yourself through those disagreements, but you have to have processes that you think are fair. So think of it as as operating similar to the legal system. If you have a system and you have a problem with your neighbor's tree is falling on your property or something like that, and you don't know how to resolve that, you have a system, and the system works, and it may not give you the decisions you want, but you can work yourself through the disagreement, and at the end of that disagreement, you have something that you go along with it, and everybody can get behind that decision because they think the process is fair. In addition, it really brings out the talents and weaknesses of the people. We talk about weaknesses, but when you have an idea of meritocracy, it allows people to have great aspirations because they can have a path to their success, and basically whoever's most capable can make the decisions. So these working yourself through it in an appropriate, fair way is a very powerful thing. Knowing that there's a fair decision-making process makes the whole thing much less emotional or much less traumatic. So if we have a disagreement and we have parties to appeal to and we work ourselves through that, that's just different than me being angry at you and you being angry at me and us going off in temper tantrums, which is kind of childish, but very human.
I know the answer to this, but I think it's an important thing for us to talk about, because I'm imagining people are wondering, can people take you on? Can people take on the most powerful person in the organization?
Well, first of all, I created it because I needed it. I created it because I needed it. I mean, I need them to challenge, because it'll catch my mistakes and vulnerabilities, so that I need it. And secondly, it would never work if I didn't operate that way. And I get literally thousands of negative dots all the time. And I reward people for that because that's important. And I think it's very important to work myself through a process to find out if it's merit, not just autocratic behavior.
Yep. It seems to me that you talk about logic. I think another misunderstanding is that all emotion is considered I don't know, bad, dangerous, or out of bounds. It seems to me you are yourself a very passionate guy. So I'd like to hear you just speak a little about the role of emotion.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the most important things are the things that are emotions, inspiration, the excitement, all of those things. That's the things that get us up in the morning. But I think that there are also dangerous emotions. We know that. There are things that help us, emotions that help us, and there are emotions that hurt us. So those dangerous emotions are the ones where we're emotionally hijacked and taken away. That's a real problem. And I think that we would all want to operate this way, particularly when you start to realize it brings actually closer and deeper relationships as well. And this is all, I'm sure, for everybody out here, theoretical, right? But it's been operating this way for 40 years, and it's the basis of our success. So it's not theoretical.
Can we just push that a little? So, your company anticipated the financial crisis, managed your clients' funds through that period. Make the argument that your culture actually has something to do with that result.
Well, first of all, I think that, I'll tell you what the moment was like. You do our calculations, and we have a view that's very different than the rest of the world's view at that time. So the independent thinking, we had among ourselves different people who had different views, and the ability to work ourselves through those was essential for us to being able to stand aside from the crowd. So I needed to have the independent thinking, and we needed to work it through. And then even at that time, we had to have the fear of being wrong, because you can never be confident that you're right in the markets. And so to place the bet, but to place the bet in a defensive way, and to work out together the engineering. What I believe is that everything happens over and over again through history. The world operates like a machine. It happens over and over again. And that if you can sort of go above yourself and your circumstances and look down at yourself within your circumstances within a historical perspective, and then have agreed upon principles. Principles are how to handle things that happen over and over again. By having that, it's helpful, and ours are just oriented around this idea of meritocracy, so it allowed us to have an independent point of view while being not 100% certain, and to be defensive, and it allowed us to play that well.
It seems to me that you combine two unusual passions. One, I have a sense that you actually have a deep enjoyment and passion about the markets and playing the markets, and there's something in that
Yes, I do.
turns you on.
Yeah.
And you also have this deep interest in human psychology. And could you just speak a little to each of those and their relationship?
Well, the first is my game, and the second are my relationships. Like I said, meaningful work and meaningful relationships. Relationships are extremely important to me. So when we talk about psychology, I think it's an extension of relationships. If I want relationships, we have to understand each other. And then by running a company, I had to deal with both. I started the company myself. It was out of a 2-bedroom apartment, and you grow and you have people that you're working with. And then when I had that, I had to deal with how to beat the markets, and then also how to have those relationships. And naturally, it seemed to me that I needed to have an idea of meritocracy. How could we work together if we didn't have an idea of meritocratic way? I'm just going to order you around? So I needed those basic fundamental things. Meaningful work and meaningful relationships, and understanding psychology. I've got very interested in neuroscience and artificial intelligence and all of that, all related to decision making and understanding how people I work with think.
I understand you're also a long-time meditator.
Yeah.
What does meditation do for you?
Meditation, I do transcendental meditation. I've done transcendental meditation since 1969, so whatever that is, 47 years or something, a long time. And it is the best gift I can give anybody. It is a means of centering yourself and going into your subconscious. It literally takes you into your subconscious mind. Gives you equanimity, and then it brings you into your subconscious mind. And when your subconscious mind is where your creativity comes from, you know. You don't work hard at your creativity. You take a hot shower and a fantastic idea comes to you. So it bubbles up from the subconscious mind. And I found that it helps me with that equanimity. That's helped me a lot. And so it does a lot for me.
Okay, can we go back to the markets again? What is it about macroeconomic playing that especially excites you?
Well, it's the big picture. It's the world. It's, you know, I like the fact that, you know, it's understanding the world and the pieces and how they fit together.
Yes.
And then it's betting on it. So, you know, it's not theoretical. Everybody's got a theory. But when you actually have to bet on it and you get the real feedback of how you're actually doing, the objective feedback, I think that that's a kick. I like the fact that I can go long or short so I don't have any biases. In other words, there's a bad world, there's a good world, it doesn't matter. It's all up to me. I mean, I'm still at the end of the day, us or all of us together are in it, but we don't have any cycles, you know, meaning cycles. Everybody's long things. Well, we could be long or short. We just have to make good decisions as to whether things are going to go up or down. And so I like it. I love the big picture.
Are you
and I love how
aware
it
that
fits
your
together.
whole face lights up when you talk about this, when you talk about playing the markets, the macroeconomic thing?
I'm sorry.
Your face lights up.
Well, it's what I love. It's exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
And I get to do that with people I love too.
Yeah. So you mentioned your biases. How do you protect yourself from your own biases?
Well, most importantly, the people around me help me do that. And I, you know, have these worries about my biases, you know, that I've learned. And by now, you know, I've probably been kicked around enough that I know where my weaknesses are. I would say that the thing that I've observed in incredibly successful people is that they have attributes that are two-edged swords. You know, somebody may be very creative, but they may not be reliable, and vice versa. And that through their time, they know where to compensate how to compensate their weaknesses.
Do you think that the culture that you've created is generalizable to other businesses and sectors, or do you think there's something specific to needing people who can make good decisions like you would in your business?
I think absolutely, and I think it goes beyond even creating an organization. I think the thinking that your opinion might be wrong and having humility about it, and then going to try to see things through others' eyes and viewing that as a curious, exciting experience so that you can have a civil conversation to explore what's true, can exist at an individual level. There's no good reason for that, for not operating that way. Yet, human nature is such that it's a problem. People don't do that. You go to a restaurant and somebody says, I like the restaurant, the food's really good. The person sitting next to them was reluctant to say that they dislike it. Isn't that silly? So to get beyond that can exist at a personal level and it could exist on an organizational level. Who wouldn't rather have an idea meritocracy?
Let's talk about the principles. You started writing things down. It led to something that's now been downloaded over 2 million times. What was the impetus for all of that?
Well, in the markets, I learned that every time I made a mistake or learned something, it was handy to write it down. I first started to do it with, every time I made a trade, I would write my criteria down, and then I would close the trade, and I would then be able to take that and encode that by computer. I believe the same things happen over and over again. So what I was finding is that if I did that same exercise of encountering an experience, and instead of just making a decision, going above myself, essentially going above that decision, and thinking what are the criteria for making that decision, and writing those criteria down, and then make the decision to do it simultaneously, that helped me a lot, and it helped other people a lot. Because by taking those criteria and just writing them out, we could discuss whether they were good criteria or bad criteria. And then when the next one came along, we had a better way of dealing with it, an agreed upon way of dealing with it. And then I found also that I could encode those in computer and help to make a computerized decision-making process too. That was a big help.
One of the formulas and the principles is that pain plus reflection equals progress. In ordinary organizations, we tend to dampen down pain. There isn't all that much reflection. Can you talk a little about this formula?
Well, I think it's, yeah, let's take the physiological part of it. The psychological pain probably happens in the amygdala. It's the fight or flight. It's the thing that gives you that spurt of emotion, and that emotion fades, like the adrenaline that gets you to lift the car, but then it fades. And so the pain probably indicates something's wrong, and there's a signal there. And I found that my best learnings came from painful experience. But I made a point of sort of creating a knee-jerk reaction after the pain subsided to reflect on the pain and try to find out what lessons there were learned. And so my reaction became very different. Problems began to appear to me more like puzzles, that if I can solve the puzzle, I would get a gem, and that gem would be how to approach those things differently. So I do believe that, pain plus reflection or learning from mistakes produces progress.
Would you be willing to share with us a big mistake that you've made that you learned a lot from?
Oh, yeah, I think my biggest mistake was I'm a professional mistake maker, trades, probably maybe, I'm lucky if 2/3 of 1/3 of my trades are probably wrong. But the biggest, which was in 1979, 80, 81, I did these calculations of you couldn't pay debts. The country couldn't pay debts when banks lent out to Latin America all this amount of money, much more than they had, and they wouldn't be able to make the payments. And as a result of that, I worried about a real bad economic situation, and I got, nobody paid any attention to me then, but all of a sudden I was asked, as these things started to transpire, to go to Congress, and I was on Wall Street Week, and I called the bottom, I called the depression at the bottom of the stock market. 1982, I'm on Wall Street Week, and I'm testifying to Congress, and I'm saying there's going to be a Great Depression, and in 1982, it was the bottom of the stock market. Mexico defaulted in August 1982, crash, and the Fed eased, and I learned, and boy, I learned humility. But I mean, that incident sticks mostly in my mind, but I can tell you many others. And painful mistakes are also sometimes, juggling too many things. I have a terrible rote memory.
Let's just go back to the whole Mexico thing, though. What was the key learning from that mistake?
My key learning to that was to try to find people who disagree with me, who are smart, and to try to bring it out, and also to hold my risks in a different way, to balance my risks. I had too much bet on that situation, and also to study history better. I learned about the mechanics of betting better.
Good. We're going to open it up.
I learned about relationships too, because, well, I learned that some of the best times are when you have bad times, because you really understand your relationships better too.
In what way? Who's with you, you mean?
Yeah, who's with you, who's not, what the quality of the relationships are.
Before we open it up, I want to ask you, as my last question, then we'll let other folks ask you questions, but my question is really, why are we here right now? Why did you come? Why were you willing to have this interview? And I suspect, you want to be serving Bridgewater well, but my sense of you is that you have a mission that's much bigger than Bridgewater. And I wonder if you want to speak to that for a moment.
Well, I'm 66 years old, and I've learned some things that are valuable. And I think they're misunderstood. And I think also, I do believe that the greatest problem of mankind is the inability to take those opinions out of their heads and to work them through in an effective way. And so I learned some things that I want to share, and I think it's important not to be misunderstood. So that's the reason I'm here. You are asking me questions. You spent a week in Bridgewater. So maybe I could ask you what your impressions were. I mean, you've written a chapter in your book about it, but let me turn the tables and ask you what you think as a deeply developmental psychologist of organizations.
Yeah, so Ray's referring to this idea we have of the DDO, the deliberately developmental organization. What would an organization look like if it so valued developing the capabilities of its people that it would fashion a culture that would immersively bring everyone in the organization, from the most powerful to the newest recruit, into a process of their own further becoming in the very context of doing their work. Not kind of the 20th century solution where you have executive coaching and leadership development programs, all of which are great, but go on too far from work and for too few people. And we scanned the country looking for organizations that might actually be living by the principles of what we think we've learned in adult development and brain science. And we found a few companies, Decurion, based here in Los Angeles, Next Jump, an e-commerce business in New York, and Bridgewater, which we think are, none of them is perfect. You'd be the first to say that, there's an ideal, and you probably fall short of it on a regular basis, but you know the direction that you're heading for. And I think there's a kind of courage and creativity in kind of resisting the current fad that you should just focus on people's strengths, never mind their weaknesses, and so on. It's a tough place to work, but in every one of these organizations, people said to us, I've had some of the most painful experiences here that I've ever had in a workplace, and I would never want to work anyplace else but a place like this. And it's understandable to me. People said to me at Bridgewater, it's a hard place to stay and it's a hard place to leave, that you have people who in the first year discover it's just not for them. But as you say, when they make it to the other side, you kind of got them for life.
Yeah, something like 10, at the 10-year mark, half of our population we lose probably 35% in the first 18 months. We have a mismatch. But about half of our population that was there 10 years ago is still there and couldn't work anywhere else. Tell them about when you went to, was your kindergarten when you were interviewing where you would send your...
Yes, I chose my kid's school on the basis of a teacher's math lesson who started out by, let's find out who made the best mistake on the homework. That's what you're thinking about, right? So a kid would say, well, I screwed up this, and teacher would say, yeah, you did screw that, but that's not a very big mistake. Somebody must have made an even bigger one. And Ray and I share kind of this concern that we have an educational system that doesn't prepare you for a culture like Bridgewater's because it sort of teaches you should be worried about making mistakes. What I'm impressed about your culture is that it has an almost entrepreneurial attitude toward people development. You know, the entrepreneur's watchword is not to avoid failure, right? Fail frequently, fail fast, fail forward, learn from your failure. And that's what I see going on in your culture. You know, you have enormous success that you're celebrated for, but you have it because there's so much failure going on that people are learning from every day.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay.
And also the realization that success comes from knowing what you don't know more than it comes from knowing what you do know.
Yeah, yeah. So we could go on like this for some time, but I think you've all been very patient. And we have almost been triggered into an epileptic seizure from the process of listening to ourselves with a 2-second delay. So I don't know how it is for you, but it's a very disorienting experience for us. So it'd be even better to hear from you all. So we have mic runners. I can see them all over the place. And we're happy to hear your questions.
Hi, Ken Broad. There was a dystopian headline out of, boy, that echo is distracting.
Oh, you have it too.
Out of Bridgewater 2 years ago, about 85% of public pension funds would go bankrupt. Could you just speak to the simple math behind that?
Well, the simple math behind it is that there's a required return to meet the obligations of public pension funds, and the actual returns are going to be much less than those required returns, and as a result, assets are going to have to be sold, and if you pencil those out, it's a major problem, and it's a major problem for insurance companies. It's a major problem around the world. Our obligations in not only public pension funds, but obligations in so many different ways are very large relative to the returns that the assets will produce. And it's a gradual squeezing that's going to occur. It's like, it's a major problem.
Colin Tate is my name, from Connexus Financial in Australia. Thank you for your comments. I have a two-part question. Firstly, can you tell us, are you authentically satisfied and fulfilled? Do you have an experience in life of being successful? The second question is, as a man with something around $20 billion of worth, what are the surprising consequences that have come with that kind of wealth, and what, at age 67, do you plan to do with it?
Well, first of all, I don't have $200 billion in wealth. That's the amount of money I manage for others, but I do have a lot of wealth, so I can answer your question. So I don't think that success is like a lot of people believe it is, and for any really successful person. I think that everybody's always struggling. And what happens is, you just struggle at a higher level. It's like learning how to ski or play some sport, and you're just kind of doing this higher thing, but it doesn't feel like that. It just feels like I'm struggling. And I think it's, and it's a good feeling. The way I think of it is, I've always thought that it's like, in order to be successful in life, you have to cross a jungle. Or you could stay on the other side of the jungle and not cross the jungle. But if you choose to cross the jungle has all sorts of things that can do you harm and bite you and everything along those lines. And so the best way to do that is to go into that with people who can see things differently and watch themselves and struggle to make it to the other side. And then what I've discovered along the way is that it's always a struggle, and I enjoy being in the jungle. I don't want to get to the underside. I don't want to get out. So that's what it feels like to me. In terms of, let's say, the money, I think that there's a full cycle. Dust to dust, ashes to ashes, and dust to dust. Meaning I started with nothing, I didn't have anything, and just from the practical point of view, I don't believe that giving my kids a lot of money is a good thing. I think the best thing I could give anybody is strength, and struggling produces strength. And I also experienced my own opportunities. I think the biggest problem is a lack of equal opportunity, and there are certain things that also inspire me a lot. Nature, the ocean inspires me a lot. So it's fun to be able to make those kinds of contributions. You have to have that. It's not an obligation. I find that it's very difficult. Is saying that it's more difficult to give away money than it is to make it, and that's true because you don't have a feedback mechanism. If you're wasting money and you're running a business, then your costs will exceed your revenues and you'll go broke, and so it'll be self-correcting. When you're doing things philanthropically, you don't have that same kind of feedback loop, and so it becomes a challenge. But it's exciting. So I guess that's how I feel.
I read, did you sign the Gates Buffett pledge to give away half of your fortune?
Yeah, and I thought that I did. Almost anybody who signed that pledge did it not because they are really pledging it, but because they think that that's, I think, a good role model. I mean, meaning show others, and also because we learn. These are people who have to give away significant amounts of money, so there's an education that comes from that. And I also admire those two people a lot. Are you not, you're picking the ones? There's some over here.
Yep, right
Maybe
there.
I could ask. Oh, okay.
Larry Aikman. I'm from LA, at UCLA. You've told us a great deal about process. My question is two parts of the same question. How much time does process consume in your everyday work day? And second, how do you ever come to produce a product, make a decision?
So I think that what you're referring to is the process of thinking about how we make decisions rather than the just making of decisions. Is that what you mean? In other words, working yourself through the disagreements?
Right,
Supporting the culture, making the culture work.
Oh, yeah.
Helping people
So
get better.
in terms of the process, it's a little bit like it's an investment. By thinking through how we make decisions rather than just be making decisions, we then have those decision-making criteria, which makes it better in the long run. But you have to have a process. In order to have an effective idea meritocracy, you have to have processes and tools that help to guide what people are doing. I have something that I've called an app that we've developed that's called a dispute resolver. And you push a button, and if you got a dispute, and it will direct you like how you follow it through, somewhat like the legal system. I think processes that facilitate the idea meritocracy are important, but it's just like the processes that exist in other organizations. I think the real question is it an autocracy? I don't think an autocracy is good, somebody ordering around a lot of other people and sort of knowing better and they can't question. And it's also going to mean that you're not going to have the best people because the best people necessarily need to question. Or do you have a democracy? And democracy doesn't make any sense to me because one man, one vote, there's not equality of decision making. Or do you have believability weighted decision making? Okay, so I believe in believability weighted decision making, and I have to have processes that are going to assign believabilities in a fair way. So, well, this is developed over a period of time. It doesn't have to be so developed, as I say, to have some version of it, but the processes and the tools are important to develop that infrastructure.
It is true in all these organizations that I studied that one of the things that strikes people first when they come into them is how much time is being spent on what some people would regard as mere personnel issues. I mean, you have often the most senior people in the organization spending time with often very junior people, just helping them to get better. And people look at it and think this is a very unusual way of thinking about how best to spend our time. But in all of the companies, they all say yes, and this is one of the reasons that we're so successful.
Yes, and of course, that time management has to be done like a pyramid. In other words, each person has got to be doing it, has got to be helping others.
Yeah.
So it works so that you disperse the load.
Yeah. Yeah. Who has the mic?
Amanda Pullinger, CEO of 100 Women in Hedge Funds. This echo is very strange.
I know.
So in all the analysis and data that you've looked at, have you found any differences in how men versus women think about making mistakes, being transparent about mistakes that they make?
I would say maybe I haven't noticed much difference really, but I would say if there was a little bit of a difference, maybe the women are a little calmer about it, and maybe a bit more testosterone at work with the guys, and they're quicker to fight. You know, it's like why women are more successful at microfinance and some of those things. There's maybe less willingness to fight, but I would say by and large, not much difference.
I had a question. How do you deal with the fact that you work in an ecosystem and the fact that you want to have independent thinking?
If I'm understanding you, your question is, how do I deal with the fact that we want to work in an ecosystem
Yes.
and then have independent thinking?
Yes.
Right. We've made the ecosystem so that there is this built around independent thinking and the debate. In other words, to value thoughtful disagreement, to give everybody the right to make sense of things and right and obligation. So it's the heart of what we do. We built a system to do it. I would ask if you're in any other organization that isn't built that way, it would seem to me.
Are you referring to an ecosystem that's larger than Bridgewater itself, that it kind of exists with various kinds of stakeholders and clients? And
Oh, I didn't understand that.
I don't know if I...
No, the thing I was saying is that the fact that you work all together, in fact, has an influence on the independency of your decision.
Well, disagreement is what we do a lot of. So when we say it's not, it's in our culture to disagree. So I think we get out in the world like others do, and we mingle and so on. I think it's an approach that is, if I'm understanding you correctly, is going to produce much less one-mindedness. I think you're asking if I have an ecosystem, will I have more one-mindedness? Everybody going along. Yeah, I think any organization is going to create more is going to have a risk of one-mindedness.
Right.
And I think that you'll have less of it in one that is trying to nurture that independent thinking. I mean, it's one of those things that we're real scared about is one-mindedness. It's part of our culture to be scared about that.
I think you have to compare these kinds of organizations all the time to the ordinary organization. You're worried about the phenomenon of groupthink. And sort of the question is groupthink more likely or less likely to happen in an organization like this one?
Well, you've seen different organizations. What do you think?
I think it's much less likely to happen because you're pulling on and looking for minority views. And you're assessing that maybe that person who's in the minority, actually has the wisdom.
Yeah, you've seen many organizations, so
exactly.
You know how it compares.
Follow the leader and groupthink is much more likely to happen in a non-meritocratic organization, in my experience.
My name is Lewis, and I was wondering, how have you been able to scale the meritocracy culture from the earliest days in your apartment to today, and how you continue to adapt as your organization grows over the next 20, 30 years?
Yeah, and especially because it has grown very rapidly recently.
Thank you.
Yeah, every problem creates a new need for design. So my case, when we were operating just as a small company, roughly, I remember the time 67 people was the year, because I would write everybody Christmas cards and buy them gifts, and I couldn't do it at 67. So 67 was the number of people when communication started to different. Before then, we all kind of knew each other, and it made sense. And then from then until we had, I don't know, several hundred people, there were no principles written down, and it was a bit more chaotic. Then we built systems. So now that not only they're written down, but people have 15 minutes a day that they watch tapes of events that are transpiring. There is a process that you come in when you join Bridgewater that goes on for about 3 weeks. And there's ongoing experiencing of that. There are people who are more experienced in this. They've been around it for a while to do coaching. And so it's something that has become more systemized and more institutionalized. And, it lends itself to a lot of debate, but it's become much more systemized. So I think that's important.
How many employees now in Bridgewater?
About 1,500 employees.
So do you think there is a sort of an upper limit on creating a culture like this? Do you think in a 100,000 person organization you could have a culture like this?
I think I think if you engineer it, in other words, this dispute resolver, and you have to say, like the legal system. In the legal system, there's a legal system for every person in the United States. Okay, that means how do you have the appeal? How does it work? How do you get work? So you have to have a structure to be able to do it that way.
Great. I have a question. It goes about 2,000 years back to Aristotle, who talked about in any virtue there's a vice of excess and a vice of deficiency. And people believe that truth is important. Is there no part of Bridgewater where there's an excess of truth, where there's not a limit of some sort, or should be a limit of some sort? And the other part of it is, do you think this radical transparency is applicable to all human institutions? For example, should I always tell my wife what I think about her?
I don't recommend that. Look, I think both of your questions are sort of oriented to the extreme. And I think the important thing is not the extreme. I will say that spouses at Bridgewater have described how it's affected their relationship with other people, and that straightforwardness. So I think the real question is
positively or negatively?
positively. Although there is a joke that they say when you join, you have spousal support group. We need a spousal support group because it does require a transition. I don't want to make it. Look, could we, if we were getting together, have a conversation, just be straight with each other, try to work it through? I mean, that's, like the essence of it. Do you mind showing people what's going on? I think we have to ask ourselves more about the emotional barriers and just trying to get past those emotional barriers. Like, would you like to know your weaknesses? Really? Okay. Might you find it painful to find them? Right. Okay. You'll be confused even if they exist, but that's what it's about, really. I don't want to make it, an extreme that we always have to push it to that extreme. But I do feel it is difficult for me to be disingenuous. So, and not tell people, if I have a critical thought of them, and this is the way we operate pretty much, if I have a critical thought of them, the absolute worst thing is to talk behind somebody's back, because that just is erosive, and it doesn't get anywhere. It's bad. And justice is the right to face your accuser. And so if I think of something that is critical, I also don't know if it's true. So it is my notion of integrity, and it becomes kind of our notion of integrity. We feel better about it. So that's basically what it's like for the most part. I mean, don't you think it's weird that we can't operate this way? I hear that said so often, but we can have these behavioral changes. If I was going to enter into a relationship, I'd ask you, how do you want me to behave with you? You want me to say I'm human and therefore I can't be straightforward with you, and you can't be straightforward with me, and we can't talk about those weaknesses? Well, then you're not going to get anywhere. So I think we react to habit. We've acquired a lot of bad habits, and I think that you can acquire good habits, and when you have that kind of straightforwardness in which you could talk about things, or even have humility, knowing your weaknesses and worrying about being wrong, and it's okay to fail. I think our whole political system has problems because of that. Anyway, I'm just curious. I'm just curious about. Let me just take a head count. How many of you think that basically this is logical? Okay. How many of you think that you could do it?
How many of you would want to do it if you believed that the culture was actually trustworthy and not going to punish you for your mistakes? How many would actually want to work in an organization that moves more in this direction? It may not be exactly like Bridgewater.
Well, great.
I remember
Let's aspire to it. You could do it in your own organization.
The first time I met Ray, there was a case study on Bridgewater at the Harvard Business School, And the professor asked the same question, and this very bright woman who'd been very active in the conversation, very impressive, she said she could never work at Bridgewater. She said, I want people to think I'm better than I actually am. I don't want people to know who I really am, right? Which is very honest. But people will often say, isn't that human nature? But I always say, you know, if it's human nature, then you have a bunch of aliens running around in these companies, you know, because it does seem like they're human beings. So we've been told that we have like 3-4 minutes to wrap up. So any last questions, please?
Mr. Dalio, first, my name is Hania Sadat. I'm an advisor with Morgan Stanley. I love the fact that you meditate for over 40 years. My question is that I believe that strategy works until it doesn't. I understand that your company is based on some true principles, but do you also, your team updates those strategies or come up with different strategies often? And do you believe in the fact that strategy works until it doesn't?
Yeah, I think in the narrow sense, the strategy works until it doesn't. I think that that's why you have to have radical open-mindedness. You know, the fear. We have to have a strategy. And I think that that radical open-mindedness and fear is a great protector. And I think, as I say, my fears are my greatest assets because it produces diversification and leads me to dig and satisfies my curiosity. And that's some form of a strategy. Yeah. But I'm with you. I'm really worried about being wrong. Maybe my strategy of operating that way will have some flaw to it and will cost me. I don't know.
And maybe culture itself is a kind of strategy. I think that's, you know, one of the lessons of a company like yours.
In the end, all machines fall apart and die, right? So, you know, there's always that.
You'd mentioned earlier that about 35% of the people that you hire are gone within the first 18 months. And I'm curious if you think that it's your hiring process or if it's more the notion that you have a kind of a charter school in the sense that it can only work for a certain number of very elite people. And if that's the case, can you actually scale your systems significantly?
I think it's more the second, and the eliteness is not just a matter of the intelligence; it's really the matter of the open-mindedness, because people do have these different strengths, and if you fit them into those different strengths, they could do great. But yeah, if you know, there are something like 11,000 firms in our business, you know, and we're, I guess some would say we're one of the most successful. So you can't do that with average people. But each person can live up to their particular potential. So yeah, I don't think it's, when we have 35% attrition, it's only because our recruiting process can just take you so far. It can take even the person who accepts the job so far. It's a little bit like being a Navy SEAL. You know, not the average population is going to be a Navy SEAL, and then, you know, you say, hey, I want to be a Navy SEAL, and you see the pictures of people going in the cold water, but it's not like actually going in the cold water. So, you know, until you're in that experience, those people don't know what it's like. So you have to, you know, we can only get the recruiting process so good, and then it's trial and error that's going to be able to test us. But I will say that it's like being a Navy SEAL, or some people say it's also a little bit like being an experience of the Dalai Lama. It is a self-discovery, empowering process, because almost all things that you think are painful are just in your head painful. And once you start to change your attitude, there's no reason for any of the pain. You know, once people get there, they're empowered by it. So anyway, it's probably the second, though.
So Ray, thank you for giving us an hour of your time. Thank you all.
Thank you.